Sounds like we have one more spectacular day in this run of our October fall. Everybody's marveling at the colors of the trees and the beautiful temperatures. I hope we all get outside and enjoy some of it before it turns cold and Laura goes skiing. It's Today in Ohio, the news podcast discussion from cleveland.com and the Plain Dealer. I'm Chris Quinn here with Laura Johnston, Layla Tassi, and Lisa Garvin. We've got news to talk about. Let's get going. The FirstEnergy public relations team keeps trying to distance the new leadership of the company from the corrupt bribery scheme the utility used to undermine our state government. And we question their continued secrecy in that area. But there is one area where FirstEnergy is making good on its vow to be a better citizen. Layla, where is that?
Well, they've stopped using dark money in Ohio after they agreed to disclose future contributions. A reporter, Jake Zuckerman, tells us that the company has pretty much cut off its contributions to Ohio-based nonprofit entities that spend outside money to support politicians. That's according to disclosures the company is required to make under the terms of a deferred prosecution agreement with the U.S. DOJ. However, the disclosures show that FirstEnergy did still make about $130,000 in similar payments to political firms in 2021 in New Jersey and West Virginia. They also operate utilities there. So they're continuing to lobby Congress and contribute to politicians in other states, but they have mostly put an end to their political spending in Ohio, and they're down to only one lobbyist in Ohio. That's from 15 that they had in 2019. So, and part of the reason for this, Jake points out, is that politicians seem not to be willing to take checks from FirstEnergy anymore in Ohio. Since the initial arrest in the bribery scandal, candidates and party committees in Ohio have returned a combined $390,000 in contributions from the company's state and federal PACs. So that could have a lot to do with their decision-making here.
What a turnaround, though. When you talk to Jake, he'll be covering the trial of Larry Householder if we ever get to it. And he views it as this is going to be the best illustration we've ever had about how government in Ohio works. And the way it worked was FirstEnergy bought and paid for it. I mean, you talk to people that have been around a long time, the power they wielded in the State House was overwhelming. And now not. I mean, if you listen to this spending, to go from 15 lobbyists to one, that's amazing.
That is. It's quite neutering of their political power here. It's quite astounding.
It'll be interesting to watch them try to spin during the trial. We expect all sorts of stuff to come out of this trial. There'll be revelations every day. We'll be covering it by the minute. And FirstEnergy is in the middle of it. They were the lever that got everything moving. So they're going to be dragged through the mud, and it'll be fun to watch them try and say, yeah, but that's not us anymore. That's not us anymore. Renewed
squeaky
calls to
clean in Ohio now.
They send lots of press releases about how they're cutting the trees down around the power lines, and they're doing good things for the community. But that's going to be an interesting time. It's Today in Ohio. J.D. Vance and Tim Ryan were supposed to have just two debates in their battle for Rob Portman's Senate seat, but now we have a third on the horizon. Lisa, who's sponsoring this one, and will it be nonpartisan?
This is very unusual. They will be appearing together for a third time. Well, not really together, but on November 1st in a televised town hall in Columbus. It's hosted by the Fox News Network. So the candidates apparently will appear separately, and they'll each get a half an hour to take questions from the moderators, Brett Baer and Martha McCallum, and also from the audience. This is the first time that Fox News is presenting both candidates to their very conservative audience, so it ought to be interesting. This forum has been in the works since summer. They pitched the idea, Fox News pitched the idea to both Vance and Ryan campaigns, and then the talks escalated recently after going nowhere, and then they finalized this forum over the weekend. So it will be their third debate. The first one was October 4th by the Fox 8 affiliate here in Cleveland, WJW. That was televised statewide. And then there was one October 11th by WFMJ in Youngstown, but that was only local, although you can find it on YouTube. So yeah, this is interesting. I don't know about bipartisanship, but this is the first time that Fox News has ever hosted a Democratic candidate that I know of.
Yeah, but is this going to be like Bob Costas calling a game where they're just all in for one side? I mean, I salute Ryan because he's walking into a rigged game. Fox News is not legitimate news. They're completely the state media of the Republican Party pretending to be news. I guess Ryan is not afraid. He's been very, very straight in the way he's tried to appeal to voters. The New York Times had a story this week saying he's been running away from the D in his campaign materials. He's just running as Mr. Ohio. But this should be interesting. I wonder why they're not facing off. I wonder why it's one at a time.
That's an interesting way of doing it. But I think also Ryan, too, may appeal to some Fox News voters with some of his centrist and maybe even, right of center views. So, maybe he thinks he can pick up a few votes there.
It'll be hilarious if they ask Vance softball questions and then they turn and, draw their fangs into Ryan, the true Bob Costas on the Yankees kind of treatment. Be fun to watch.
Do you remember Hannity and Combs? Remember Sean Hannity used to have a Democratic guy, to get the two of them together, but all he did was just dump on this poor guy Holmes.
Yeah, and that's what I would expect Ryan's going to get. Fox News is all in for Vance. They've been attacking any Ohio journalist that dares to examine Vance's record. It's been a very strange period with them. It's Today in Ohio. I had hoped to avoid assigning a story on this, but so many readers sent notes to ask about it that we figured we did need to explain. We talked a little bit about it last week, Laura, but why has the term Indian summer fallen into disfavor, replaced by the term second summer?
Because while there are a lot of theories about why the term Indian summer came to be used, some of them are derogatory. And this one in particular is that this weather is a trick. It's deceitful. It's something that's given and then taken away, like the term Indian giver, which is outright, derogatory. So that nobody necessarily knew that. I think it's a term we had used for a long time without thinking about where it came from. But when you brought it up, I think it really resonated with people to kind of it was a conversation starter. You wrote about it in your subtext account from the editor. My mom asked me about it. And, it's been this stretch of, I think this will be our fourth day of just lovely, want to spend all your time outside, sunshine. And so people have been talking about it.
It's an odd one. I got a bunch of notes from people, they had the idea that you've destroyed my memories of my childhood because we can't say Indian summer. And I'm thinking, well, it's not the name that you remember. It's going outside in this spectacular weather. And if it's offensive to some people, who cares if you change it? But this was a pretty strongly held sentiment on the people I heard from over the weekend. There's the Fox News watchers who just call me woke and call me names. But then there were others who were just taken aback. It happened very quickly. I wasn't aware that AP had changed its style on this a couple of years ago. And I think a lot of people were not aware of it either. And that's why it was such a talker.
Yeah, absolutely. The style guide that AP that we all use to kind of be consistent in our writing states in no uncertain terms, do not use terms such as Indian summer. But there are actually, if you don't like second summer, there are a whole lot of terms that this kind of weather has been called over the years. In Europe, it was an old wives summer. So
okay, that's maybe
better. I'm going to get super offended by that. There's a St. Luke's summer, St. Martin's summer, the halcyon days in Greek mythology. I had no idea referred to a period of weather at all. So, but I you know what, my kids were playing outside last night. They were rolling around in the leaves and playing on tennis on the driveway. And I'm like, these just everybody just treasures these because they will be gone soon. I sat outside on my porch doing work yesterday and I just didn't want to come inside.
Okay. Well, story explaining all this is on cleveland.com, and it's proven to be a popular one. People want to talk about it. It's Today in Ohio. Cleveland Mayor Justin Bibb is promising housing for all using American Rescue Plan cash to deliver, but a bunch of people stand in his way. Layla, who are they, and what is the obstacle they pose?
Well, Stimulus Watch reporter Lucas DePrilli has been covering Justin Bibb's Housing for All initiative. And the initiative includes $68 million, $35 million in incentives for public and private housing, $10 million in home repair funds, $5 million for a revolving loan pool to benefit small and minority contractors, and $18 million to address homelessness and provide affordable housing. But housing officials in Cleveland and city council members have told Lucas that achieving the goals of this initiative and lifting up neighborhoods through these kinds of investments could be difficult because of the insidious trend of what they call predatory investors. The idea here is that we see investors who are often from out of state, who buy up houses in Cleveland very cheaply. They don't pull any permits to improve the properties. And some of these houses are on the state's list of lead toxic sites. And then they rent them out and they squeeze every last dollar out of the property before they eventually sell them off to perhaps another out-of-state buyer and turn some profit on it. And the properties just degrade without any maintenance. No one answers to housing code violations from the city. And these investors will often set up individual LLCs for each property that they own, and the person behind it can't be held accountable. And all the while, these houses are driving down the quality of the housing stock in Cleveland and making it more difficult for Clevelanders to become homeowners in their own neighborhoods. It forces many low and moderate income families into becoming renters because they can't compete in the housing market with these investors. In some submarket areas of the city, as much as 60% of home sales are by LLCs or bulk buyers. One report showed that on the city's east side, more than 45% of 1 to 3 family homes in 2020 were purchased by investors, and that was up from 15% in 2004. So the city is saying that this is the thing that really stands in the way of their housing for all goal.
But there was talk a year or two ago about passing a law where anybody who was out of the area who owned property would have to have a person that was responsible, that was local, that somebody would be the contact for the city. Somebody could be hauled into court to answer for the violations when you can't reach them. What became of that? Did they decide?
I don't recall, but remember recently they've been trying to, they've been discussing, there's the legislation to allow housing code violations to be sent to property owners without certified mail. That they're trying to bypass that part of the system just to get these in the system and get the system rolling on these violations. But again, even if the owner pays fines, it doesn't force them to fix the property. You still have these houses that are just degrading and rotting in the neighborhoods and just wreaking havoc on the housing stock.
You hear about this more and more. Realtors are upset about it because they have people that want to buy houses and they can't get them because they're getting snapped up by the investors who, like you said, they let them rot. They take all the money they can get out of them and then they dump them. But this is a problem. So there's not really a solution here. They've just identified the problem.
Yeah, I think, right now they're trying to figure out what is the way around this because they're trying to set people up for home ownership and to build some equity and wealth. And this is standing in their way.
We can't be the only city dealing with it. Go ahead, Lisa.
No, but I do have to say, and I do read the local real estate transfers that are published in the Sunday Plain Dealer, and you will see houses that go for sale in East Cleveland for $3,000. And then you'll see homes that with contiguous addresses, $10,000 each that were all bought probably by the same person. So, and I do know from the article, they say that Cleveland and East Cleveland are particular targets of these predatory investors. So, I mean, I don't know what these homes look like that are $3,000 and $10,000, but they are out there. And I'm sure investors can write a check for 3 homes. Boom, boom, boom.
Mm-hmm.
But other cities must be dealing with it too. I wonder if anybody's come up with a solution. You've got to be able to hold people accountable for not following the housing code. I mean, if you don't fix your house, they can haul the owner into court. And if they can't reach the owner, I guess what you're saying, Layla, is they just assess fines and eventually there's a lien on the house.
Yeah. I mean, Lucas's story opens with one such case where this guy ended up with so many fines and delinquent taxes that his bill was higher than the selling price of the property. Like the value of the property was less than what he owed on it. And he was just I think he lived in Hawaii or something like that. He was like a ghost.
Wow. Sad story. It's Today in Ohio. In one of the many sinister schemes a lot of people use to steal or undermine the 2020 presidential election, two right-wing conspiracy theorists use robocalls to deliver falsehoods on the east side of Cleveland and in East Cleveland. Now they're facing the music for their crimes. Lisa, what's the latest with these two?
Yeah, these two guys, neither of them Ohioans, 24-year-old Jacob Wohl of Irvine, California, and 56-year-old Jack Berkman of Arlington, Virginia, pleaded guilty in Cuyahoga Common Pleas Judge John Satulis Court this week to telecommunications fraud. That's a fifth-degree felony. It draws up to a year in prison, and they will probably pay the maximum $2,500 fine on this. The sentencing will be the 29th in Judge Satulis Court. They actually faced more counts of telecommunications fraud and bribery, but 14 counts were dismissed as part of this plea deal. So Wohl and Berkman formed this group called Project 1599, and they placed over 3,500 robocalls filled with misinformation to East Side and East Cleveland voters. They warned them that their personal information could be used against them if they voted by mail. They could be arrested, or their information would be given to the CDC for mandatory vaccination and all kinds of falsehoods. Wohl and Berkman are also charged with multiple felonies by the Michigan Attorney General, Dana Nessel, where they did the same thing there, but they're appealing that to the Michigan Supreme Court.
It's amazing how many efforts were made to destroy the 2020 election, including and up to Donald Trump trying to overthrow the government on January 6th. What's the game? Why did they attack the voters on the east side of Cleveland and East Cleveland? They're just trying to keep them home?
Yes. I mean, because as we know, the east side of Cleveland and East Cleveland is probably a majority Black population, most likely to vote Democrat. So, yeah, if you could scare them into staying away from the polls, you've lost some votes there.
I don't remember anything like this before very recent history, that you didn't see efforts like this to basically torment the voters and play these kinds of games. And it makes you wonder what's going on right now. We're heading in to the midterms 2 weeks from today. And you just wonder what we don't know that's going on to rig that election to try and get J.D. Vance elected. These are largely tactics used on the Republican side. I don't think we've seen many or any on the Democratic side, have we?
Not that I've read.
Yeah, it's the Republicans playing dirty. It's today in Ohio. Halloween is not just a day or a weekend anymore. It's interminable. We had tiny tigers walking up the street a week and a half ago for a merchant's Halloween thing. With weeks to go to the big day, Laura, what is going on?
It's a Halla season, and it basically starts when Labor Day is over and ends on October 31st. So my kids have had Halloween dance. We've had Spooky Saturday. There's a trunk or treat for swim team this weekend, a monster dash, and Downtown River had a monster march for treats. And basically, if you want to go get candy, there are a zillion places that you can do it starting in the beginning of October. And, Halla Weekends at Cedar Point has been running all of September. It's open all weekend. These haunted houses we've talked about, well, I don't know that we've ever talked about them on the podcast, but they even offer seasons passes. That's how long this season could be for like $150. So I think the idea is that people have really embraced this holiday and just wanted to have as much fun with it as possible. That could mean multiple costumes for your kids and just multiple weekends dressing up and enjoying fall fun, I guess.
Yeah, it gets back to what we talk about. People are so turned
that.
off by all the ugly news they want to break. But two things I want to ask about.
Yeah.
Where did trunk or treat come from? And for people that don't know what it is, explain it.
So trunk or treat is the trunk of your car, and it's held in a parking lot, and people back their cars in and open their trunks. And a lot of times they can have themes, right? And they'll decorate, especially if you have an SUV or a minivan, like they'll decorate the inside to look like a graveyard, or it'll go with their costumes, or, it's kind of like a tailgate. Then they'll set up outside, and sometimes they put cornhole or games in front of their trunks. And the idea was that, I feel like maybe the 80s was the zenith of this, where like trick or treat was scary. Like kids were going to get bad things in their candy bags, and you could have a what is it, like a blade in an apple, right? Like those were the horror stories of the suburbs in the 80s. And so they created these events to be safe. So you knew who was going to be there, and it was like well lit, and they're held by a church or school or something.
So now we teach our kids to take candy out of strangers' trunks.
That's right. And get as much as you can because the season is lasting forever.
It would have been nirvana when I was a kid. Instead of having to go door to door for miles to get your bag filled, you walk across a parking lot and you got candy galore. All right. The other thing I want to ask is Gretchen Crowan asked this in the newsroom. What's your strategy? Do you let your kids eat all the candy right away so they get one jolt, or do you spread it out over a month where they're constantly putting sugar into their bodies?
They cannot even eat that much candy in a month. Like, I'm telling you, by the time Halloween actually rolls around for trick or treat, my kids in the past, I don't know what's happening this year, they've been tired of getting more candy because there's been so much candy, and they're like, yeah, I'm kind of over it, right? I mean, we're talking loads here. And then you always have the leftovers that you give out, right? Because we never run out of candy. So I think this summer we threw out some Halloween candy, which is really sad.
But it's not good for them to have that much sugar. And so, I don't know, it seems like what we've done is created a mother load of sugar for children, so we're poisoning them. So it's fascinating how this has changed from one night where kids really had to work for it to just a bounty of sugar.
Oh, yeah, there's
I
no
have
work.
a theory. I do have a theory about why we have developed so many parties around Halloween for kids. It's because costumes have become so expensive. Oh. And so, if I'm going to pay $40 for a kid's costume, they're going to wear it until it's threadbare.
Well, but I also think it's not just kids, right? Look around. My neighbors had inflatable Halloween decorations in their yard when the pool was still open. Okay. And I was like, okay, that is too early. But people really like decorating for the holiday. There's graveyards and giant spider webs, and this 12-foot skeleton that Home Depot sells for $300 sold out for the third year in a row on the first day it was available on July 15th.
And there are three in my neighborhood, 3 12-foot skeletons in my neighborhood.
I wonder if this is like Sweetest Day, where it's a Northeast Ohio thing, or whether it's global. I suspect it's probably global.
I think it is. I think it's this, Christmas has, the connotations that there's gifts and there's a lot of work that goes on with it, and there's like religious part of it. And Halloween is just like pure fun. Like the only point of this holiday is to have a good time.
It's Today in Ohio. Sounds like Cleveland resolved the dust-up. It had over $17 million in American Rescue Plan money dedicated to lead abatement. Layla, we talked about it last week. What's the resolution?
Yeah, they got this train back on the track, but last week's debate over it was kind of intense. So by way of background here for listeners, back in the spring, the city had contributed $17 million to the Lead Safe Coalition for a variety of lead abatement programming, but that money did not include funding for more thoroughly addressing the most severely lead contaminated homes, which was important to Mayor Justin Bibb, apparently, because last week he attempted to rectify that by pulling back $5.5 million from that $17 million that was already promised to the coalition and reallocating it to the most severely contaminated properties. And some members of council, namely Carrie McCormick, was totally upset by this change, especially because it seemed that there was some disagreement over whether the Lead Safe Coalition had been brought into the loop on this amendment to the legislation. But this week, it appears they've reached a compromise because last night, council approved that amendment to the original funding, and it meets Justin Bibb halfway. It gives $3 million to cleanup of severely contaminated properties not covered by a U.S. Housing and Urban Development grant. It gives $1 million for lead-related code enforcement, and then $13 million to the Lead Safe Cleveland Coalition for loans, grants, and loans and grants to make homes lead safe, training lead safe professionals and testing. Those were the original purposes for the money. That seemed to satisfy everybody at the committee table Monday afternoon. So we're moving ahead.
I still think the better solution was what you brought up last week. They should have put more money into it and expanded it instead of cutting it apart. They have it.
Be the hero who's like, hey, we're giving $5 more million to the,
and we've talked about it. There is no bigger threat to the future of Cleveland. You're poisoning children's brains, making it less likely they will thrive or have higher education or all of the things we talk about. And if you spend this money and do it right, it has generational implications because those kids will thrive and then their kids will thrive. So I just didn't understand why I didn't say, okay, we'll do the 17 million. We'll add 5 million for what you want to do.
Right. I personally think lead abatement is probably the most important use of ARPA funds, and you almost can't spend too much of it on it.
No, they should have done 100 million. It's Today in Ohio. What is Magnet, and what is the significance of it getting a shiny new home to carry out its mission? And yes, Laura, I did use the word shiny. Lisa, this one's yours.
Yeah, the Magnet stands for Manufacturing Advocacy and Growth Network. It's been around since 1984. And what they do is they help small and medium-sized businesses incorporate advanced technology into their business processes, things like 3D printing and robotics and so forth. And they also create career paths for these high-tech manufacturing jobs that are coming in the future. So they used to be in a CSU-owned building on West 25th, but they're moving to 1800 East 63rd inside of the old Margaret Ireland Elementary School in the Huff neighborhood. They had to completely renovate the school. It's a 1962 school, very mid-century, kind of bland looking. So they spent $18 million to jazz up this building. They basically had to knock out a bunch of load-bearing walls, replace them with these like steel columns and beams. So they're creating this huge shop floor because they have, machines there. They have cranes overhead. They have 2-story, high windows to let in all this natural light. It sounds wonderful. So basically the CEO of Magnet, Ethan Karp, says he wants to dispel the myth that manufacturing is dying in Northeast Ohio and that jobs are disappearing. He says it's 20% of the employment in 24 counties of Northeast Ohio, and it's half of our area's, gross domestic product. And he says we really need to train the new generation of welders and maintenance techs and engineers and so forth because, and I just read over the weekend that there's no electricians because they're all old and they're all retiring. So they really need to work to replace this aging and retiring workforce.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. Everybody's trying to get workers, but the manufacturing sector is huge, like you said, huge in the economy. And if they don't have the workers, it does harm the economy. Steve Litt was pretty excited about this in the story he wrote about it. It's on cleveland.com. It's Today in Ohio. The Rock Hall is Cleveland's unique attraction, and we're coming up on the induction ceremony that garners the headlines each year. It's in Los Angeles, not Cleveland, but the Rock Hall stages exhibits for the new inductees. Laura, what do we know about this year's plan? They just released it a few days ago.
Right. So all of the inductees are going to be honored in this new exhibit, and the artifacts include the Gibson blues hawk guitar that Dolly Parton played in her 2008 Backwoods Barbie tour. There are handwritten lyrics from Simon's You're So Vain and the outfit Eminem wore during the Super Bowl halftime show. So you'll get to see Pat Benatar's coat from the Invincible video, Ian Hill from Judas Priest's Fender jazz bass, and Cotton's acoustic guitar from the 1950s. So a lot of really cool things. Obviously, you can't see the ceremony in Cleveland, but you will be able to tour all these really cool things.
Yeah, and I don't think they've announced that there's a simulcast at the Rock Hall. In past years, when it was out of town, or sometimes even when it's in town, they've let people who couldn't afford the pricey tickets or travel come to the Rock Hall and see it on a big screen. But I haven't seen that. There have been some years where they didn't do it because somebody rented the place out for a party. So I wonder whether there'll be any place for Clevelanders to go to celebrate this. This museum is unique in the world. No one else has one. It really does put Cleveland on the map. And so the more they do to emphasize that, the more attention it draws.
Right. So the ceremony is November 5th. You can watch it on HBO starting on Saturday, November 19th. So I guess it's 2 weeks later, but the closest I've been is inside the Rock Hall. They have that theater where there's like a video of all of the, I don't know if that's all, but a lot of induction ceremony moments, and like the sound is really great, and like the seats rumble and you do feel like you're there. So that is very cool.
Yeah, it's a big night. We'll be there. You can check out breaking news about it on cleveland.com. It's Today in Ohio. That's it for Tuesday. Thank you, Lisa, Layla, and Laura. Thank you for everybody who listens to this podcast. We'll be back on Wednesday.